Hi, everyone. This is Nick from Wackerbarth, and you're listening to the VonDubCast. If you want to skip right to the interview, skip 9 minutes. But before you do, please consider subscribing to the podcast on whatever podcast app you listen on. Please consider going to the YouTube page for the VonDubCast and subscribing there, following the social media pages, and also telling a friend if you like the episode. Thanks. All right, welcome everybody. Episode 51. Thanks for all the support we got last week for episode 50. Some really good downloads, some really good shares. You guys really, I put a little bit of a call to action in the intro, and I think you guys knocked it out of the park. You talked, you told your friends, you shared the posts, and it really got to a lot of people. And I think that conversation with T had a lot of important content in it for people to hear. So I'm really glad that if any episode was going to kind of get out there a little bit further, that would be the one. And to follow it up with an episode like I got today with John Morgan from MMA Junkie, I'm just so excited because I think there may be a little bit less of that important stuff that maybe was more apparent in T's episode. But personally for me, this is another one of those episodes where I was over the moon. When John said yes to coming on, I was just, a little bit starstruck. I had heard John ask amazing questions at every pre-fight conference, post-fight conference, all over the place. John just has a really deep understanding of the game. He has a lot of respect from the fighters, and he's one of those guys that clearly loves it just as much as I do. And to be able to have a conversation like this where, we got to talk about more of the journalistic side and what has grown it and what makes the UFC and MMA so special as a sport, and all these types of things. It was just such a fun episode for me. It was right up there with, the Colen brothers and Lars Kallio, having a comedian and authors on, and then guys from the MMA journalistic side. Like, this is just the start of what I'm so excited about. Is there's so many areas that I want to go down and have people on from, right? Esports, NHL players. There's so many areas where I haven't even tapped into, and I knew when I started this, I'd be starting off with, smaller guests, and it'd probably take me some time to build up. But just when you kind of jump the queue and you go from interviewing, your buddies from Lister to a guy like John Morgan, it fills you up with excitement for the next big one. The conversation you get to have, I've mentioned this a couple of times, but there's certain conversations where even if it wasn't going to be recorded, I get so much just personally out of them that even if nobody ever heard them or if it never made the light of day, it's so meaningful to me. And this is definitely one of those episodes. And I'm hopeful that even if you're not a big MMA fan, you can get something out of this and you can understand and maybe have the picture painted to you a little bit of what, besides the violence that is so apparent and turns so many people off, what there is to offer in MMA and what makes it so beautiful, and that sort of thing. So I'm hoping that my passion and my excitement will carry forward through this episode, even if maybe this isn't your favorite topic. So if it isn't, take a risk on it, take a swing. I think you guys will really enjoy it. There's some awesome fights coming up tonight. I mean, by the time this episode is released on Monday, you guys will already have seen it all come and go, but UFC 259 is tonight. I'm recording this at about noon on Saturday, and I've been waiting months for this card. Israel Adesanya, Jan Blachowicz. Izzy, I talk about it with John on this podcast. Izzy was one of my favorite fighters. I got to watch every fight in the UFC. I got to hear about him before he came into the UFC and really follow his journey and listen to him on podcasts and his mindset and where it comes from, and just, keeping that white belt mentality where he's always learning and just, he thinks things through so clearly, and he's so authentic and honest with himself and doesn't care what people think. He's into anime and all this stuff, and I just love his mindset. And then his skill set is absolutely unbelievable. And the fact that I didn't think anybody was going to touch him at his weight division of 185, the fact that he's going up to 205 now to fight Jan Blachowicz, who's an absolute monster, is going to probably be weighing in at, 220, 230 pounds on fight night. And Izzy's going to be going in there at like 190, 195. Like, just the storylines there are just incredible. Like, I don't know how people can not be excited for this. And then underneath that, you got Amanda Nunes and what's her name? She's so beautiful. What is Megan Anderson? Chase is gonna kill me. Megan Anderson, one of the most I don't even know what the word to describe her is. She is extremely popular. She's extremely good looking. She's got a great personality. She likes to stream video games. She's got a kind of a cult following over there. She's an Aussie. And as you guys have heard me talk about on the podcast for a million times, Aussies are my favorite people on earth. And that just, bumps her up a little bit higher in my books, and absolutely love her. And it's a shame she's about to get her face punched in by Amanda Nunes. I think Megan Anderson would do very well against a lot of people, but Amanda Nunes is a whole different animal. I got to watch her fight live in Edmonton one time when the UFC came through, and I don't know. She is on a whole nother level that I don't think women's MMA is going to catch up to in a couple of years. I think that's what happens when a sport is so young. You see it right now in men's and women's MMA, that it's just evolving and changing at a rapid pace. But I think with women's MMA being so frowned upon for so long and just breaking through and being so huge so quickly without any buildup, there's kind of still they're still developing, and there's still women that are 14 right now that have been watching Ronda Rousey for 8 years or whatever it was, and started training jujitsu and judo and karate and all this shit from the time they're 4 or 5 years old, and been watching it and seeing a pathway forward. So yeah, that's unfortunate. And then another title fight, a third title fight, everybody. I know you guys are all going to know the results, but I figured I'll give you the little bit of the breakdown of the main 3 fights and then my picks, so that you guys can either look in awe at how well I did at predicting, or laugh at me on Monday morning when you hear this and it's all wrong. But Petr Yan and Aljamain Sterling. Aljamain Sterling is an absolute beast on the ground. He has, again, a great mindset, great team around him. Longo Serra MMA, BJJ up in New York there. They do an amazing job. They have such a good crew. They're such a tight-knit family, and I've been saying that Alj is the dark horse in that division for years now, and I was waiting for him to get his title shot, and I'm so excited. But again, my buddy Chase was asking me, who should I bet on in that fight, if I'm doing a parlay, and I don't even know. It is such a crapshoot. I keep flip-flopping. I have rode with the Aljo for so long, I want to say it, but that Petr Yan, that, it's something about the look in his eyes, and just he gets that little Terminator look, and I just don't know what to do. So as for my picks, I think Aljo, I'm going to say it's smaller cage. Aljo gets a hold of Petr and takes him down, maybe submits him. I heard Petr has amazing ground game too, though, so we'll have to see. I think, unfortunately, as much as I love Megan Anderson, she's one of my favorite fighters in the UFC. I just don't think anybody in women's MMA is going to touch Amanda Nunes till she retires. That's just the unfortunate facts of it. I think probably, I don't know, first round knockout or TKO, maybe second round. And then Izzy Yan, that is, again, there's so many unanswered questions. I just think Izzy's skill set and mindset is so strong. He will never give up. He has an iron will, so he's gonna have to be put out, or he'll never stop coming. But Yan has 30 goddamn pounds on him. If somebody's going to be able to put him out, that would be the difference, right? And people say, Israel Adesanya's had over 100 fights, right? He's been kickboxing, boxing. He's fought guys this size of Yan, right? And people say oh, well, how can you even say it's even going to be competitive, right? Izzy's seen this for 100 fights. He's seen the big power puncher, but it's different in MMA when you take all these rules together, the clinch, the ground. I think my guess is what's going to happen is Izzy's still going to win, but I think it's going to be tight, and I wouldn't be surprised if that size plays a difference in a smaller cage. I think from the outside, with all the feints and stuff that Izzy throws, and he just overloads their mind. You'll watch at a certain point in the fight, you'll see frustration, I bet, from Yan, and he'll start to explode across and just trying to catch him in flurries and then pin him up against the cage and use his weight, make him tired, drag him down. But I think Izzy's just so elusive, and he's so smart, he's going to be aware of that, and I'm sure he's got tricks up his sleeve. And I mean, fuck, Izzy's my ride or die. I'm going with that guy all day. So let's say Izzy, third round, head kick KO. That's what I'm going on there. So those are my picks for the top 3 fights. But again, I wish I could have maybe released this a little bit earlier. I flip-flopped to maybe releasing this episode Friday, but I don't know. Whatever. It's coming out Monday, so you guys already have my picks. That's what it is. I hope you guys enjoy this episode. Tell a friend if you do. Maybe all the MMA heads in your life, you can give them a little heads up that you enjoyed this podcast. All right. See you guys in the outro. All right. Thank you for being here, John. It's a big honor for me. I mean, as people listening to the podcast know, MMA is a big part of my life. These last 5 or 6 years, I always liked the sport since I was a little kid, but my parents didn't really like it. I wasn't really allowed to watch it. I had to find the areas when I could watch it. I'd watch it when I could. And then I went to university, got busy. As soon as I graduated, I kind of went all the way back in, and I found a bunch of podcasts and supplemental things that really showed the rest of the story outside of the cage, and just how amazing the sport is. Outside of every Saturday night, right? Sunday through Friday, there's a lot that goes on in MMA. There's a lot of shows like yourself, a lot of journalists that do a lot of good work, and the storylines that come behind it. And that's just what brought me into it. And I've been waiting since I started this podcast to have someone on that loves it just as much as I do, and we could talk about everything, all the goings on. But kind of maybe before we get into the current events of it, I'm very curious for your story and how you got into MMA and how maybe you took that leap to start pursuing it as a career. We're talking a little bit before about some of the perks that come with it, and I'm just curious how that got started.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting journey. I mean, when I was a little kid, 7, 8 years old, I liked professional wrestling. It was back in the days like Hulk Hogan and Macho Man Savage and all that. And then about that time, when I figured out that it was fake, I was like, oh man, I'm so disappointed. Like I thought they were really fighting, man. I thought they were going at it. And so I kind of drifted away from that. But I had this connection to fight sport, and it started with pro wrestling. But when I was about 12, Guy Mesger was actually opening a gym in Dallas, and through a friend of a friend, we were there for his gym opening, and he had on a tape of Muay Thai from Thailand.
Oh, cool.
And I saw Muay Thai for the first time, and I was watching. I was like, wow, like this is what a fight looks like. And it really kind of ignited that passion for me. I thought Guy Mesger was like a really cool dude as well. He's opening this kickboxing gym, and had the ponytail and the movie star looks and all that stuff. And man, just really kind of started watching anything I get a hold of, which included like the early UFCs, Pancrase, all that. So it was really watching from the very beginning. I mean, the first UFC I ever attended live was UFC 16, way back in the day. So was really watching from the start. And at the same time, I was growing up playing professional sports, but kind of realized at a certain point, like, okay, I'm not going to be a pro at this. You know what I mean? I was playing baseball, soccer, basketball, but I realized, okay, I'm never going to be a professional athlete, but I still want to be involved in it. And I enjoyed writing. And so, I wanted to be a sports writer. That way I could still be involved in sports. This was back in the day when you could just be a writer. That's no longer possible. Now you got to do everything. You got to do everything, video, audio, photos, everything. But anyway, just kind of it came to a point where I married those two passions together, got lucky in a lot of ways, right place, right time to have a passion for martial arts and mixed martial arts as it kind of started to blow up, and decided, hey, let's chase after this and let's try to do it. And that's what I've been doing for the last, 15, 16 years at this point.
Wow. And when you first started that, what was the perception like when you told people, like, I'm going to pursue this goal of writing about MMA, which at that point, 16 years ago, the perception of what MMA was at that time was much, much different than it is now. How was that perception, and how did you deal with maybe that perception?
Yeah, it was funny. When I decided to do it full time, I think a lot of people thought I was crazy. You know what I mean? I had a pretty good job at the time. I'd actually put myself through school working in restaurants. And I stayed with restaurants because it paid me more than journalism did when I got out of it. And, I had a nice career going, and I was like, but this isn't really what I wanted to do. I don't mind this job. It pays well, and I'm good at it and I enjoy it, but it's not what I wanted to do. And so, I think there was a little concern among my parents that I was a little bit crazy. And as you said, I mean, at the time, MMA, wasn't as accepted as it is now. It was still the blood sport, and people wondered, if it should be outlawed and that sort of thing. So, it was a little bit wild, but that's why I would say, I think I was very fortunate to be in the right place at the right time, and to have this passion for it, because it was just as things were really starting to blow up, and man, it's paid off,
Yeah, for sure. And as that perception, I mean, I think anybody that has followed the sport, even peripherally, will know that perception has changed a lot lately. And, going from, Fox to ESPN, or even, Spike to Fox, and then Fox to ESPN, right? That was huge steps forward. Were those kind of the big milestones, or was it certain areas? Like, I'm kind of curious, was it just a slow build, or were there certain times throughout that where you felt like clear, demarcated, we just took a big step up? Like, I mean, lots of people look at like the Conor McGregor's, Ronda Rousey's as being those, but what was it to you as someone that was really close to it?
Yeah, no, I mean, it was a slow process, like a small buildup, you know what I mean? Like I even remember, I'm originally from Dallas, and I remember like pitching to the editors of the Dallas Morning News, like why they needed to cover MMA. And they're like, what, we don't. So it was small. It was little, educational battles like that all along the way. But you got to point to the Fox deal. The Fox deal was huge. Once it was on network television, that's when the attitude really started to shift and really started to sway. And especially because at that point, now you've got like blue chip advertisers and companies that aren't concerned about the product. And the other thing I think too is now you're starting to see, a generation of people like yourself who just grew up with it and it was always there. For the longest time, you're trying to educate people to accept something new.
Yeah.
Now you're seeing a generation of viewers that grew up and just always had it there. So didn't know, don't remember a time when it was like not okay to watch and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's been a snowball effect. But if you look to a moment that acceptance really started to change, it was definitely getting on network television with Fox.
Oh, that's awesome. And that is so cool to see, because I was so kind of at that time, I think when they made that big Fox jump, that was kind of where I was not on a hiatus. I always watched like the big fights throughout that, even when I fell off a little bit. But then in coming back in, that was what was so cool to me. Was I don't think I ever fully understood. I loved the sport itself, but I didn't understand what I would love about the sport like I do right now. And it was like we said at the start, kind of everything that goes in between those Saturdays, right? And that was when this latest round, when I got in, as soon as I graduated, it was finding guys like Ariel Helwani and yourself and Brendan Schaub and Joe Rogan and all these guys that would tell these stories. And I just found it was so intoxicating. If you watched, back in the day when Ariel used to do those really long shows on Mondays, if you watched that and got the full download of what happened on Saturday and the full download of what's coming the next Saturday, you almost couldn't miss a card. It was almost impossible because the storylines are so good. All these people's stories were so amazing that, it changed my mind of what a sport can be. And then I was a big sports guy in all the other sports, right? Hockey is the big one. I'm Canadian, right? Obviously hockey is the big one up here, but you could see almost other sports start to take notice of that, of how much more invested you get when you learn these intimate details of these guys' stories. And there's so many out there. How much do you think the growth of MMA was just because I think I'm always torn, because I think it's such an amazing sport in itself that even without all those storylines, I think it would be still popular, but then that just brings it to such a different level. To you, what do you think it owes to the growth of MMA more? Do you think it's the sport itself more, or do you think it's kind of those storylines and what the amazing MMA media does around to tell these stories? And now the fighters themselves, like Sugar Sean, that has his own podcast, that's amazing, right? And it goes really in depth into his life and his training. He really lets you pass those first couple layers where normal sports kind of block off and you don't get down there. Now you get the whole, top to bottom, his whole life of what he's about and who he is. And that I've never felt nervousness for a sport like someone, once you know those stories and then watching them step into a cage against another trained assassin, my hands sweat. I'm pacing. My girlfriend always laughs at me. Every time a big fight comes on with one of my guys, I'm just a wreck all day, right? Like, sorry, I kind of stomped on my own question there. But.
No, it's funny. No, listen, man, there's certainly a balance to it. I mean, at the end of the day, the fights have to be entertaining. I mean, there have to be those highlight reel moments that can get on Sports Center's top 10 and that sort of thing. So from the sport itself, you need the sport itself to shine, but the personalities and the people in the sport are a massive reason, I think, why it's grown and why it's so popular. And there's a number of reasons for that. Number one, mixed martial arts athletes are more accessible, I think, than any other, athletes on the planet.
By far.
And they make themselves available to be out there. And listen, they're all unique characters. I mean, first of all, the dedication that they prove, into the sport is admirable. I mean, what you have to do to succeed at the highest level of MMA is incredible in terms of, commitment. And I think that's, something that's kind of inspiring. But they're all pretty unique. I mean, listen, it's been a long time since I trained, but I used to train martial arts and MMA, but never once did I want to actually compete in a fight. I'm like, nah, I'm good. So like, as you said, to be willing to lock yourself into a steel cage with another human being who's, highly trained and hell bent on doing physical damage to you, man, that takes a special kind of individual, and I think the more you learn about how much the mental side of the game is a challenge, I think it's extremely unique. And as you said, I mean, I think you end up identifying with people, you end up, it just means so much more than just, you're not just watching two athletes compete, it's like your guy in there, your girl in there, what I mean? And it can be nerve wracking. So I listen, I think the athletes that compete are a huge reason why the sport has continued to grow because, they are such unique individuals.
And I see so many times fighters will take it upon themselves to do that, right? Like the Sugar Seans that have their own podcast and Dan Hooker and all those guys that you see have very diehard followings. And it's very much linked to how much work they put into making themselves successful, making their story easily digestible and available for people. And I feel like that is such an important piece of what makes the sport special, especially for the diehard fans that really eat that stuff up. And I wonder at what point other sports and I guess MMA and the UFCs and the Bellators of the world, I wonder when they're going to start trying to push that as well, because it seems like they leave it almost up to the fighter a little bit. If you don't want to promote yourself and do those things, you don't really have to, but it's such a huge piece of what their success is. I wonder, do you think the UFC and Bellators of the world understand that and are trying to actively push that and support the fighters that are doing that? Because I mean, they're not standing in the way of them starting their own podcast by any means, but I don't really see them promoting that type of stuff for the fighters.
It's interesting because I mean, there's only so much they can do, right? And they are contracted employees. They're not employees. You know what I mean? They're independent contractors. Yeah. So there's certain things you can and can't do, and I think as well, it's just difficult for them to decide, what you get behind and what you don't, and what you try to push. But it is definitely left up to the individuals. I think one of the more interesting ones is Amanda Nunes. A lot of people say, why do they not push her as the first openly gay champion? It's because she doesn't want to. She's made it clear. She's like, look, that's my private life. That's who I am. And, I'm not ashamed of it, but I don't want to be this
an advocate.
Exactly. I don't want to be like, I'm leading this brand. I'd rather just leave my personal life. So there's only so much they can do, you know what I mean? In certain ways. So it is very much left up to the fighters themselves. But that's the struggle that the UFC does have to deal with, right? I mean, you got 600 fighters on your roster, and how do you promote them all? And you can't promote each of them all. So the fighters that have embraced that and realized that they've got to take an active role in their own promotion, it's meaningful. Because the other thing too is, versus other professional sports, especially team sports, you don't get that brand of the team to kind of help your brand as well. You know what I mean? It is really, you are the product. And so you have to understand that. So, and then, you get into some people that just, it's not easy for them to do that. There are fighters that just aren't comfortable kind of being out front and they realize, I mean, how about last week, Curtis Blades, he said, look, it's like, look, I've got a speech impediment. You know what I mean? Like I can't be out here on the mic and trying to, go back and forth with these guys because I just sound corny doing it. So I'm not going to do it. Obviously, the unfortunate result for him this past weekend, but he's one of those guys who says, look, I'm not going to be that way. And I'm not going to try, not everybody can be Conor McGregor. Not everybody can be Chael Sonnen, and so I think it's really important that fighters, kind of find who they are and just, push that.
And what I love, I think that's a perfect example, Curtis Blades, right? Because when I hear him come on a show and do interviews, right, maybe not the leading up to a fight kind of thing when it's, trash talking that, but he's so honest and so you do get a real piece of who he is. And it might not be the Conor McGregor, old school Conor, I guess I got to say old school Conor style of, stirring shit up but it's honest and it hits hard. There's a couple other fighters that have kind of that same style. And what I love is there's so many different ways you can write your story as a fighter. You can be those guys that are going to stir shit up and do that kind of thing. Or you can just be those honest guys that talk, about what they're feeling. And some guys will come out and say, I wasn't feeling it that night. I couldn't get it going in the back and I came out flat, and they're so brutally honest. And something about that, there's so much genuineness in the fight game that you almost don't need all that stuff. As long as you're willing to open yourself up and let the fans in on whatever your ride is, you have that opportunity. So if you're a guy like Curtis Blades with a speech impediment that doesn't want to go cutting promos all the time, you still have an avenue for people to get behind you and get behind your story. So a guy like me that is following all this, I love those guys just as much as I love the guys stirring shit up, the Masvidals and all that. Like I'm here for it all. I love it. As long as there's a story there and as long as it's genuine, that's why I kind of, maybe the only one guy that I haven't really got behind in all of MMA. I love everybody, but like kind of the Henry Cejudo of it, because it was so, just that one lack of genuineness is just like, I want to get behind you, but just let me in. I don't know who you are. To this day, I don't know who Henry is as a person, which is so odd to say. Like even some of the fighters, and I think this is a testament to what MMA journalism is, maybe away from other sports. And I think you nailed it with also individual sport versus team sport, but it's very rare for you to not, if somebody's at that level of UFC where they, a ranked fighter, and to not know anything about them is almost unheard of. I could go through, me and you could probably both go through the rankings right now and tell you a Coles Notes version of their life story of everybody in there, right? Except, Henry, I know his career of his Olympic stuff, but who he is as a person, I don't have that. And that's why it's hard for me to get behind. And I mean, that is a choice, and he did amazing with it. I love what he did because it shows now another path forward. I just like that there's multiple paths and guys can do it, right? He almost went the wrestling way. And And at first I didn't like it. And then after a while it grew on me, and his skills just spoke for themselves. And I loved him for that. It's like, oh, you were such a menace in there that whatever you're doing outside the cage, I'm here for it because it's awesome. But I just love that, everybody, their story, at least a piece of it, and it makes me really involved in the sport like I've never felt before in almost any other sport.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, there's only a handful of people that can pull off stuff like that. Another one I think of is like Colby Covington, right? Like
same thing.
Colby Covington that you see on camera, that's not who Colby Covington is behind the scenes. I mean, Colby's one of the most politest, nicest, most respectful people. He'll it's funny, man. He always shows up early to interviews and stuff. He's kind of quiet and very polite and humble. And then you turn the mic on as soon as he sees the red light. Everything changes, and I think that's okay. You know what I mean? I think it's okay to do that if you're good at it. You know what I mean? Like, with Henry Cejudo, he's good at it too in a funny way. Like he just embraced his natural cringiness, and he is a little bit naturally cringy, behind the scenes.
Okay.
And he just said, "Hey, man, we're gonna crank this thing up, man. We're just gonna go all in on it." And it's fun to watch. But you're right. I mean, the thing is that what I always say about, marketing and popularity fighters, like if you ask anybody, who their favorite fighter is, you ask a fan who their favorite fighter is, and then you say why, you never hear, oh man, because his striking technique is just so crisp, or his arm bar is just legitimately unstoppable. It's always like, nah, I like him because of this thing he says, or this thing he does, or where he's from, or what he represents. You know what I mean? And so, personality and I think people like to see themselves in there, and somebody that talks like they talk, or comes from where they come from, or represents something that they represent. And I think that people want to get behind fighters like that and cheer them on as kind of a representation of themselves in there.
Yeah, for sure. And that's what I love so much about the wide variety of these. Right, there's from A to Z. There's every personality. If you invest enough time in the sport, you will find those fighters, whoever your personality is, you'll find one that matches you and that you can get behind, because they have the crazy guys to the real calm guys, and everything in between. And I love what you said about Colby Covington there, because I think that was he was kind of the first one I went through of, I didn't really ever dislike people, or I find I dislike people in MMA, but because of what we've already talked about, eventually that come around on it. And I love it. You watch them go in the cage a couple times and you love the sport and you know what goes into it and goes into a fight camp. It's hard to dislike somebody. Right. And, that leads me to another question I got to ask you, but with Colby Covington, that's what I love so much, is for that, what he did, it was so successful, but also there was enough of his personality that came through in other areas, like Brendan Schaub saying, and a lot of MMA journalists saying that's not who he is. He's a really nice guy. And then the hardcore fans that are behind it started to realize that. And then you can get behind him and it's just purely an act, right? He delineated it so far to make it a character that you can really tell, right? Where I feel like that's almost what Henry was going for, but just didn't nail it as well, just because it wasn't supplemented by all the doing those extra things to come behind the scenes, so that people, they say like, you got to understand this about this guy, and they make sure that those hardcore fans. And what I loved about that is now Colby Covington can go to bed at night because the hardcore fans that really know who he is know that. They know he's that good person, and he's had some really stand-up people come to speak on his name, that he is this guy, right? And he's nailed it sometimes and kind of missed sometimes, and he'll admit that, right? He knows when he's kind of flubbed, or maybe he went too far, he took a swing that he missed. But it's cool to me to see that, because now, and that was kind of a question that I had for you, kind of in the same vein, is there's always that delineation between the hardcore fan and the kind of casual fan, right? And I'm wondering, I have certain litmus tests for people that when I talk to them, just to kind of immediately see how into it they are, where this conversation can go. And I'm curious, with yourself being so close to the sport, you probably have to do that too. And I'm wondering if you have any tips and tricks, because I kind of use that Colby Covington one as those things, right? If you're a hardcore fan, you'll know that that's purely just an acting, and you won't buy into it as much, right? And a couple other ones of like, you just throw out a couple names like Ronda Rousey or Conor McGregor and just take their reaction to it, and you can it tells a whole story of, what they are as a fan. And I'm wondering if you have any of those.
Yeah, I mean, listen, first of all, when fans, when you're talking to people and they're asking you about fighters outside of those huge names, you know what I mean? That's when okay, hold on, you're paying attention. Yeah. If you're asking me about Conor McGregor or Ronda Rousey or Brock Lesnar or whatever. Yeah. But if you're asking about people down on the undercard, I'm like, oh, okay, you actually watch the sport. I tell you the one for me though, and it's so we got, we launched independently as MMA Junkie, and then we were bought in 2011 by USA Today. And my judge, obviously we don't travel much during the pandemic, but back in the day, when you're flying around, you end up talking to somebody on a plane or something like that. What do you do for a living? What's funny is so if I would say I work for MMA Junkie and USA Today, and I see which one they get more excited about, that's the one I know. Like, to a casual fan, they go, "Oh, USA Today, that's a massive publication." But if you're a hardcore fan, they go, "Oh, MMA Junkie, I love MMA Junkie." So it's like, okay, now I know where we stand.
Oh, that's a good one. Oh man, I don't have the liberty of getting to throw that one out, but I mean, maybe we'll have to ask them a couple of their favorite fighters, see if they know anyone on the undercard. Something else I wanted to ask you about is the press conferences where they allow just questions. I find that was one of the things that drew me to you was you always ask the best questions. You ask the questions that I want asked. How much does it piss you off when you hear those questions get asked that are just so stupid, so useless, so just you can tell that the fighter doesn't even want to answer it? How frustrating is that to you as somebody that this is your livelihood to see it? I don't know. Do you feel that diminishes it? That just part of the game? Does it even bug you at all?
It's funny. I mean, it kind of depends on what's happening. You know what I mean? Like sometimes, obviously, again, right now, pandemic, everything's different. So, I mean, there's very, very little media. It's just a handful of us. But, back in the day, during normal times, like if it's some local reporter that doesn't know much about it, but they're there to cover it for their local paper or local, TV station.
They're just doing a job.
Yeah, how do you get mad at them? You know what I mean? They don't know what they're covering, man. So they're doing the best they can. Sometimes when it's people that I would expect more out of, that know a little bit more. It's just then to me it's just the motivation. Like I don't think there's like you're asking a stupid question. No, man. If you've got a reason for asking a question, it's not stupid. It's fine. But it is kind of interesting to see like when there's a little motivation behind that question. Like you're trying to trip somebody up or get them with a little gotcha. I don't like that. You know what I mean? Because it's like, come on, man. What are we doing here, man? You're trying to get this guy to trip up. Like, don't do that.
Exactly.
But otherwise, no, I certainly don't get angry or listen. Everybody's just trying to do their thing, and whether they're at the beginning of their career or further along, they're just trying to learn. I mean, everybody's doing the best they can. So no, it doesn't bother me at all.
I got you, and
but I do appreciate the compliment that you like my question. I do. I mean, listen, that's the thing is that that's the way I do approach it. I mean, I have a job to do as a journalist, and there's certain answers I have to get. Like for instance, listen, recently in Fight Island, I had to ask Conor McGregor about the lawsuit because I knew that was the only chance that I was going to get to talk to him that week. That was the only time he was being made available to the media. Now, do I really want to ask that question? Like, no, not really. But I have to as my job. I would not be doing my job as a journalist, especially to ask it in a press conference situation. It sucks. But again, that was the only time I was going to get to talk to him. So those kind of questions have to be asked. Right. But the rest of them, man, I still consider myself a fan of the sport at heart. Yeah. I mean, I can't act like a fan, but hopefully, when somebody says to me, like, man, you're asking the questions that I want to hear the answer to, that means a lot to me. That means good. I'm still tied into the fan base, and I think I see, a position on the sport that they see it in as well, and things they want to know. So, so yeah, I appreciate that.
Oh, that's awesome. I mean, hey, keep it up, and I'll keep complimenting you all the time. If you keep up the good questions, that's awesome for a guy like me. And I really liked what you said there about the gotcha kind of comments, because I think those are the ones that get me the most. And I think the reason, I think this is specific to MMA, and maybe stop me if I'm wrong, because this is getting a little bit speculative here, but I think there's a certain level of accountability in MMA journalism because of what we talked about earlier, because of how much genuine insight we have into these fans. Sometimes when the questions are being asked, right, if it's a gotcha question, the real fans will know that it's a gotcha question and that they're trying to trip them up. Just as you know that, I know that as well. And we, if somebody's trying to, just trip up a fighter that we love and throw those kind of questions or trying to throw them off their game, we react almost the same way that the fighter does. So there's kind of that inbuilt accountability to ask good questions and not to have those. If there's bad intent behind a question, it's not just the fighter that sniffs it out. And it's probably for 90% of fans, they don't realize it either. But there is a really loud majority of people that will understand that and will say something. And maybe that leads to my next question I want to ask you about is just that loud base of fans maybe over the years, because I think, and maybe this comes from MMA kind of growing on the underground, on the forums and that sort of thing. It seems like MMA would be a tough thing to cover because there's a lot of people with a lot of opinions, and it seems to get pretty loud at times. I'm not a big commenter guy. I stay off the internet. I'm more of a lurker myself, but it seems like anytime anything happens in MMA, maybe more so than other sports, there's a lot of people that want to say something. How has that been to deal with? And maybe at this point, it doesn't even affect its water off the back, but maybe even younger guys coming in as journalists, how do they deal with it? Do you see?
Yeah, but it's hard. You're right. For the most part, it doesn't bother me, but you have to get to that point. You know what I mean? Because in the beginning, man, you want to please everybody, right? Like who doesn't want to be loved? Like who doesn't want to be liked, and who doesn't want to? So you're like, yeah, man, you know what? But then you got to realize, like, it doesn't matter what you do. Like, people are going to talk trash to you. You know what I mean? Like, they're going to say it. So the thing I always try to tell people is just be honest. Just be real. You know what I mean? Like, if what you're saying is honest and it's your true opinion and it's your thoughts. And I always say this, don't say anything that you wouldn't say to somebody's face. You know what I mean? Like, if you're commenting about an athlete, if I want to be critical of them, that's fine, but make sure it's something that you would. Exactly. Like, if it's something that you would say to a fighter's face, like, hey, I just felt that, your game plan probably wasn't the smartest, or you didn't have a secondary option. It looked to me like you were tiring a little bit in the third. Maybe your condition wasn't where it needed to be. Those are all legitimate observations and legitimate concerns. It's when people, that guy sucked. He shouldn't. Yeah. No, that guy doesn't suck. You know what I mean? To even be here. So, but yeah, it's funny. CM Punk, that's a whole interesting chapter because I didn't know anything about his wrestling career. I when he signed with the UFC, I was actually on his Wikipedia page, like reading facts to help fill out my story because I don't even know who the guy is. And now I call fights with him with Cage Fury Fighting Championships, and I love the guy, man. He's become a guy that I would consider a friend, as well as a coworker. But he has a pinned, and I was pulling it up to see if it's still there, but he has a pinned tweet on his Twitter account that I think is phenomenal. And it says this, it says, some of you need to stop listening to criticism from people you wouldn't ask advice from. Yeah. And it struck me, and I'm like, that's so true. Like, what do I like? It sounds weird. It's so disrespectful. Like, I heard Misha Tate say this one time, and she said, the bad thing about the internet is it gives people access to you that don't deserve to have access to you. And I remember when she first said it, thinking like, well, that's a little cocky, isn't it? But then the more I started thinking about it, it's like, it's true. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know who you are, and I wouldn't ask advice from you. So why do you have the ability to come in and try to ruin my day by talking trash about how terrible I am? Like, nobody shows up to your work and says, man, you suck at this, you're terrible at that. Nobody does that. It's like, who has the right? So yeah, it's funny, man. I mean, you get to a point, and even still, I think fighters too, man, they see the comments, they read social media, like they may try to play like, oh, it doesn't bother me. No, it does. It bothers you. Nobody wants to see that stuff, but you do have to come to a point where you realize, like, wait a minute. And again, it may sound disrespectful, but it's not. But it's just like, wait, who are you? Like, you know what I mean? Like, why am I listening to what you say? I'm the one that has to, lay my head in bed at night and be comfortable. If I'm happy with the job I'm doing, if my employer's happy with the job I'm doing, because obviously they got, I need my paycheck every 2 weeks, then the rest of it is your opinion, and you're totally entitled to it. But you just have to realize you're not going to make everybody happy. So whatever you say, whatever you do, there's going to be people that love you and there's going to be people that hate you.
Yeah. And especially with the amount of work that the fighters put in, like, if you follow the sport enough to understand what a fight camp is and what goes into a fight camp, and then to even say anything, you realize like your points are null and void. Not to mention the actual getting into a cage with another person that has that certain set of skills that is sitting across from you. That is a whole different ballgame. But just even before that, to know what goes into a fight camp, the amount of work, right? Like, saying it gives access to people that don't deserve that, especially when you're to be on the same level of deserving. And I think that is something that is tough for journalists as well, because this is something that I was very curious to ask you, because I've seen this since I really started following it and started following so many of the journalists around the sport, is that balance of being honest, right? Like you talked about, of, hey, like that game plan didn't look good, with and for good reason, the sensitivity that the fighters have. I found that fighters may be the most sensitive athletes I have ever seen, because, and they have very good ears. They hear everything that happens to them. I remember, I think it was Brendan Schaub said something about Israel Adesanya, maybe after his first fight or something, he wasn't there, and it stuck in Izzy's head, and he hated it. And they've cleared it up since then. And then I thought, like, and I had listened to that podcast and said, like, oh no, like I you're sitting there as a fan saying, Izzy, he didn't say that. It was totally misconstrued. And I think it was just clipped out, and it made it sound worse than it was. But then I saw that happen over and over and over again, where you listened to the whole podcast and you heard what they said, and it was very fair and very backed up. And then what the fighter heard is very different. And I just imagine it'd be hard when I put myself in that situation. I imagine it'd be hard not to censor yourself and keep that honesty. And I imagine, having 16 years under your belt would help a lot with this. But I imagine if for somebody younger trying to break through, to balance that of being honest and taking them to task when it needs to be taken to task, but also knowing that it's going to come back on you and you're going to run into these guys and they're going to hold these grudges, right? How do you balance that?
Like I said, I think you just have to be honest, and I think you have to be respectful. Like I said, never write, never say, never tweet, never do anything that you wouldn't be willing to say to somebody's face. By the way, Israel Adesanya is at the top of that, dude. Like, he sees everything.
Everything.
I mean,
he has everything. I love it.
It's hilarious, man. That dude sees everything. But everybody does. Listen, I mean, you don't think so. I'll tell you a funny story. So we didn't do rankings for the longest time to MMA Junkie, because, to be honest with you, we're just like, who cares what we think, dude? Like, it's been hard for me to realize, like, no, people do kind of care what you think. But for the longest time, we were like, who cares? So we got bought by USA Today, and that was one of the first things they wanted. They're like, hey, you guys should really be doing rankings. You need to do it. I was like, all right. So I didn't want to, but we did it. Actually, you know what? It wasn't even rankings. It was fight picks. We didn't want to do fight picks.
Oh, right.
And but we were like, no, you need to do fight picks. So okay. So we the first time we did fight picks, I was like, well, who cares? I mean, nobody's gonna look at. Literally, the first one we did was Tyron Woodley versus Don Young Kim in Macau, and I picked Don Young Kim. And at the post-fight press conference, I remember asking Tyron Woodley, because this is a time that Dana White was saying, like, hey, he always chokes in the big spots. He's not ready. So I remember saying, I was like, hey, Tyron, you just had an incredible performance. Dana has always said multiple times, you kind of choke in these big situations. You just delivered. Do you want to tell him now that he's standing right there, that, hey, look what I've done? And he's like, I'll tell you what I do want to do is I want to tell you, I know you picked the wrong person. And I was like, what? So you looked at my fight pick? I was like, it was literally like the first week we had done it. And I was like, come on, man. Yeah. So it's funny. Like, they see everything, but that's what I always say. Like, honestly, just, it's okay to be critical, and it's okay to, to be, there's nothing wrong with saying, like, yeah, man, you surprised me, man. I thought his size was going to be a problem. I thought, man, and you really delivered on that. You're right, man. You showed me wrong. What's wrong with that? There's nothing wrong at all. And I think that's the whole thing. Just remember, as a journalist, anything you say can and will be picked out of context, and And you're right. You do need to balance these relationships. These relationships are important, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be honest. I mean, you owe that to the fans. You owe that to the readers to be honest. And I just think you have to know that, again, whatever you say or do, that you'd be willing to say to somebody's face, because they are going to see it at some point. And, I don't think there's anything wrong with being critical, but it's when people start getting those, snarky attitudes and hot take opinions and all that, where it's like, well, come on, man, come on. So that's all I think. I think as long as you're honest and respectful, you can say what you need to say.
Yeah. And I think that's what the mark of a good journalist and a bad journalist in MMA is. I think there's a path for those guys that just want to, talk shit, bring attention, and, you can move fast in a way, and you can get some views, but it doesn't have longevity to it, because these fighters have long memories, and you can come in and burn out very quick, get some steam. But if you do it the right way, like yourself, make sure you're honest and have a little bit of compassion for what they're going through. In the long run, it might take you longer to get where you want to go, but in the long run, you're going to be in a much better place at the end of it. Right. And I think that is very much one of those things that is a microcosm of anything in the world, right? The fast and easy route versus the right way to do things, right? It's just one of those things that comes up over and over again. But I kind of want to ask you the same question for a third time in a different way. I was kind of asking about with the MMA fans and how crazy they can be at times, and if you have to, watch what you say with that, and then the fighter side of it, and watch what you say there, and if you censor yourself. But then there's kind of one other area where I'm curious about. So there's only a couple big games in town, right? The Bellators, the UFCs. And I mean, it's changing every day, and there's lots of awesome, PFLs doing big things, Rise and One, all these guys are big, but in reality, there's a couple big players that pay the big bucks, that put the food on the table. And how do you balance being honest about what you see in the sport today with some of those big players and not pissing them off? Because as a fan, I get to watch that relationship between the UFC and the journalism, from one side, but I can't imagine being in it. You see guys like Ariel that have walked that line and, been in and out, and all these other guys. I mean, it's not just him, but how do you balance that? And does that ever eat at you when you see guys, I think we could both name a couple guys that, really follow the other side of the line where they do everything the UFC wants and every story, and they run it how they want. And again, to a casual fan, they probably have no idea, couldn't tell the difference between the two. But somebody that really watches the sport, they know like, oh, that's not true. That's just what Dana White wants to hear, right? Which I understand, putting food on the table. I'm not going to, besmirch anyone for it. But for yourself, how do you balance that? Or do you even think about it?
I don't. I mean, I don't think about it. I mean, I guess the worst that they could do is, people always, oh, you won't say anything because you're afraid they're going to pull your credential. Like, no, I'm not. I mean, if they do, okay, I can still, guess what? I have ESPN Plus. I can tune in and watch it. You know what I mean? Like, I have Fight Pass. I can still watch the fights. I mean, it's like I can still cover the fights. I will say that having media access makes it a whole lot easier because I'm not trying to, especially when it comes to like interviews and stuff, like I'm not having to set up all those individual interviews because they're just being brought to me at a press conference or a media day. So it does make life very easy because I don't have to chase people down. So trust me, I am appreciative of that. But, it's like, I mean, I don't know. I think I've been to like 400 or something UFC events at this point. Like, I mean, if I didn't go to another one, I would miss it because I like being there, but I could still do my job. You know what I mean? So no, I don't think about it. What I think about more is again, like, those relationships and I think you just have to be open and honest. Again, I know it may sound like just, repeating myself here, but I do think that's true. Look, even, UFC president Dana White, he's we've had individual discussions and he said, listen, man, I don't care what you write about me. He's like, if you want to write, if you think something we did is terrible and sucks, say it. He's like, but if you think something we did is great and amazing, please say that too. He's like, the people that Dana doesn't like are the people that just like constantly looking for negative and nothing more. You know what I mean? And that's what he says. He's like, I just don't feel like those people are giving us a fair shake. You know what I mean? And I from that point of view, I think it's valuable. Like, I do always wonder about this too. Like, is there value in the fact that I can get a hold of somebody and I can get a comment on something? You know what I mean? Like, I think there's value to be said in that, you can get, access to them. So to me, again, it may sound silly and it's a simple guideline, but it's just be fair. And I think that's true. Like, if you think something that the UFC or Bellator or One Championship or PFL or whoever else, if you think something they do is amazing, say it. But if you think it sucks, say it. But just be fair. Just be honest and be fair. It doesn't help if you have a very clear agenda,
Yeah, for sure. And I think you're right. And I think you can see kind of the reasons when Dana White doesn't like somebody. If you're a hardcore fan, you'll know exactly why, and you'll know the history, right? Because you'll have followed it. And I never thought Dana White was ever that unreasonable, right? There's usually reasons behind everything he does. He doesn't do things for no reason. Those reasons you might have questions for, but he stands behind them, right? And he's a very opinionated and stands behind his values of what he thinks they are, right? And I think you may be the wrong person to ask this of, but because of your seniority and how long you've been in it, I think it might be kind of more of a question for maybe a younger MMA journalist. But did it help? And maybe you could just put yourselves in the shoes, or maybe somebody you've talked to answer this question. But did it help to see somebody like Ariel go through what he did with the UFC, getting his credentials pulled in that, and come out the other side of it to show that, hey, even if you're not trying, you're trying to do anything, if you do end up on the wrong side of it, if you do good work and you can still come up on the other side of it, do you think that was helpful for some of the younger guys that are coming up that maybe were censoring themselves in some way to try and stay in the good books with all these guys?
I mean, I think you got to go back further to a guy like Josh Gross, right? Who is I mean, think about how long he's been banned from the UFC and yet continues to make a living by covering martial arts. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, there have been examples before, Loretta Hunt, another one that, famously got on the wrong side of Dana and is doing just fine as a journalist. You know what I mean? Has written some books and, it doesn't work so much in the MMA space anymore, but it's still doing just fine as a sporting journalist. So, so, with the Ariel situation, it probably that's more contemporary, I guess, if you're saying,
It's for a guy like me that has only been in the game really this hardcore for like 6 years or so, right? Like that's the one I saw, but maybe in general, just to see, without staking it all on Ariel, just in general to see that is an option, and that it's not the end of the world per se.
Yeah, I agree. Like I said, look, you can do your job without a press credential. You absolutely can. Again, it's nice and convenient because
Oh
you don't
yeah.
have to chase people down. You
Yeah,
know, you
yeah,
look
yeah.
at what Sherdog did for years and years. You know, Sherdog for years
Yeah.
would just go stay at the host hotel. You know what I mean? And track people down in the hallways and go to people's hotel rooms. And so they were still getting their interviews done. You just got to work a little bit harder. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because you got to set up all that stuff individually. So absolutely. But listen, I know that there's obviously a lot of criticisms about the way the UFC handles media, and listen, they've made some mistakes over the years. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They definitely have made some poor moves, but yeah, no one needs to be intimidated or feel like your career is going to be destroyed because you say this or write. If what you say is factually accurate, and obviously there's a whole lot of different things that we're talking about here. I mean, it could be depending on if it's just an opinion piece. Well, all right, maybe they don't like your opinion, but if it's like a factual piece and you're like, I don't know if I should report this because if I report this, man, like I might be on their bad side. Like if your facts are right and you've done your research and you know what you're saying is truthful and accurate, you're good.
Yeah.
You're good, because if they ban you, first of all, you can still do your job. But secondly, I mean, I got banned for writing a factual piece. Like, come on, man, your reputation is actually going to go up at that point, because it's like, hey, you're a person that was willing to say something. So, but yeah, ultimately at the end of the day, like it used to be different. Trust me, it did used to be different. But especially nowadays, like this idea, like, they're going to ban me if I write something. Probably not. Probably not.
Right. And we mentioned rankings kind of in passing a little while back. And I know that this week there's a lot of talk about Bellator starting to do rankings as well. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on rankings in general, how they're done? Do you like them, and do you like them in general? And do you think they could be done better if you do like them?
It's a pretty interesting discussion, right? Because I'm actually going to be a part of that Bellator rankings panel.
Oh,
so,
cool.
Yes, so I'll be on that. So I do like it, and actually the Bellator guys reached out to me and they said, what do you think? And I was like, look, if I'm a professional journalist that covers this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, I should have no problem offering up my, opinions on where I think the rankings stand. And I don't think that there's any reason to be concerned. Again, what people think of your opinion. Well, this is just my opinion and how I believe it is. And I think I should be able to stand behind that. But it's interesting because I have never participated in the UFC rankings. And that was, it started out because originally when the rankings were launched, they were going to give if you remember the Reebok money, they were going to give that bonuses based on where people stood in the rankings. And so we couldn't at that point, because that was a direct tie-in to what kind of income a fighter was making. And so that was viewed as a conflict of interest. And so we couldn't participate in it. And so we just never did for years and years and years. Now they changed that. That's not the way they do it anymore. Now they do it by tenure, right? Number of fights you have. But at the same time, there had been some transparency issues where, like, there had been a situation where, like, the UFC just pulled Nate Diaz in the rankings and the voters weren't allowed to vote on Nate Diaz. And it's like, well, why? I mean, no. So I never did the UFC rankings. So Bellator just came recently and they said, hey, are you able to do this? And I said, you know what? We were told that we couldn't for the longest time because of those reasons. But let me take your proposal. We gave it to our corporate folks over at USA Today. They ran it. They ran all the paperwork through an ethics committee that is designed to make sure that we don't do anything that they view as a conflict of interest. And they said, no, this looks all on the up and up. So as long as they stay transparent and everything's good, I'm excited to do them. And but it actually opens up the conversation of potentially going back and doing UFC rankings now. Now they'll have to address those issues, because I do think I wish the UFC rankings were a little bit better. I mean, I don't want to be rude to the people that are on there, but a lot of those people, I'm not even sure who they are. You know what I mean? And I'm not really familiar with their body of work. And again, I do not mean that as an insult. But when I'm not really familiar with your body of work, and this is like all I do for a living, it makes me go, so I wish more people do. Now, my understanding is the Mixed Martial Artists Journalists Association has told their membership that they shouldn't be voting on Bellator, they shouldn't be voting on UFC. I guess there's debate to be had. Some people see it as a conflict of interest because, you're having some input into matchmaking and you're having some input into opportunities and those sort of things. And I do see that as a discussion point. But to me, we have our own rankings. We have our own MMA junkie rankings. And I'm a big part of creating those each week. So technically the organizations could just grab our rankings and use them in some matrix without our opinion. So or without our approval, I should say. So for me, I don't have a problem with it as long as everything's transparent. Again, as long as, if Bellator one day just says, hey, you can't for whatever reason, you can't vote on Patricio Freire this week because we're having contract negotiations with him. Like, then I'm out. Then I can't do it at that point because you're not being free and independent at that point.
Exactly. And I'm glad you see it the same way, because that was always my biggest thing. I love the rankings of the UFC. I love what it does. I feel like it's such an important piece of the future growth of the UFC. It's so much harder. Like, I'm sure you've gone through this of like, your friends that are a little bit casual, but you want them to, there's a really good card and you're trying to sell them on it. Those rankings are really helpful. It's the number 6 guy in the world versus the number 3 guy in the world. Like, even if you don't know their names, like, I'm just trust me. Right. And that goes with it. But my biggest issue.
It was Fox that wanted them. Fox was the reason they put it in. And it's for exactly that reason. And it's so true. The example they gave me when I remember we were talking about it, and I was like, dude, you're so right. Like, college football or something, right? Like, I don't watch college football. Yeah. I just don't. I mean, whatever. But if I'm flipping through the channels, and if I happen to be off and it's, number 2 versus number 6, I realize this is an important game. You know what I mean? Just, I don't know anything about a player on the field, but I know that this is an important game. And that's exactly right. It just helps people go like, oh, okay, hold on. These guys are all right. It just lends some value to the matchups.
For sure. And that was something that I saw, but for some reason, when I first got into it, I was like, man, like, these rankings are great, but they don't, even to me, as at that time, especially more of a casual fan, sometimes they didn't make sense. And then as I got deeper into all the journalism and all the podcasts I listened to bring my knowledge base up, I started to hear them say the same thing. Like, hey, we don't really know who's doing this rankings. We don't know really, it's not very transparent. And then, like you said, there's always been some, contract disputes, them using those rankings for their own uses. And that was kind of, for me as a fan, it was like, oh, I love these so much, but there's such issues with them. So I'm so glad to hear that Bellator is going to solve those issues, or it sounds like they're going to try their best to solve some of these issues towards them, because I think the rankings can be something so important. And to me, my take on the conflict of interest piece is, it's only a conflict of interest if it's not fully transparent of who's doing it and where they're ranking it, because there's some really, really smart people in the sport, right? That don't have a check by their name, don't have anything, right? Like that Kaposa guy on Twitter that I follow, that guy, I don't know what his credentials are, but he knows so much, right? There's so much knowledge out there that if somebody's have some funny business with their rankings, it'll come to light. They might be able to get by doing that for a little bit, but it'll come to light as long as it's transparent. I feel like that was what was missing from the UFC ones, and I hope to see in the UFC ones in the future, because it's such a cool tool for growing the sport, and for even just for that added thing to talk about. And it's more storylines. It adds to it, right? It gives the fighter something else to strive for. I feel like for a long time, I mean, every fighter's striving for the belt almost. I mean, there's every so often there's a guy that says, I'm just here to make as much money. I don't care about that. Right. And that's fun too. That's a whole different storyline, right? Like we said earlier, there's a fighter for every person in there, right? If that's the kind of guy that you attract, like, I'm not about no gold or no fanfare. I just want money, right? Like that is it for some people, and they like that. But I just think it's cool for them to have something that they can strive for before the belt, right? Like, I want to break into the top 15. Now there's another goal, right? I want to break the top 10. I want a top 5 guy. It gives,
right.
It adds so much depth to what the sport is as a sport, instead of just a one-on-one thing, right? And I feel like that was one of the big goals for growing the sport. I mean, it's funny to call it the sport and then talking about it, creating it as a sport, but to bring it more into the mainstream of some of those little pieces that people recognize as, oh, that I've seen that in sports. I've seen rankings. I know what that is. And it helps bring them in, because I feel like that's the biggest piece for MMA, is just to bring them in, right? Once you're in and you start to see all this and all the storylines around, you're hooked. It's just, how do we bring them from that casual fan that's just going to, every couple cards, if there's a name they recognize, are going to go on, how do you bring them past that? And I feel like that is a tough goal. And I wonder how much these big organizations understand that. Do you think they understand that, of what a big piece that is?
They do. I mean, listen, here's the interesting thing about it, is that unfortunately, MMA to a degree is always going to be a niche sport, because there's just going to be some people that don't want to see other human beings get punched in the face. Yeah. And as old fashioned as it may sound, even people that are comfortable with seeing, 2 guys punch each other in the face aren't comfortable with women doing it. And, women are a big part of the sport, obviously. And I know, and it's weird to say that, because it sounds like super old fashioned, but it's just the reality. So like, some people feel that way, and it's always going to be that way. So, I think, obviously we've seen such a huge transformation in the last, 15 years, 10 years, even, since the Fox era started. Of course, now the ESPN era, where people do understand. I mean, it's not it's not as violent. I mean, it is a very violent sport still. I mean, Curtis Blades will tell you that this is a violent sport. You know what I mean? Like it's violent. But it's not necessarily, I think, as bad as some people have that perception in their head. And I think, as you said, once you're willing to watch, that was the craziest part. Like back in the day when people were like, I think this stuff should be banned. Like it's ridiculous. I can't believe we're having it. It's like how many fights have you watched? Oh, I've never seen it. I've never. How can you say it's too violent if you've never seen it before? You know what I mean? So, I think getting people to tune in and, picking the right athletes, and the right, I mean, who wouldn't tune into an Israel Adesanya fight and go like, this is amazing. Like this dude's dancing on the way in. Then you see what he does in there. Like you don't have to really understand, mixed martial arts very well to just see like, man, what he's doing, his body movement, the way he's doing, like it's unbelievable, And of course, it's going to take people a little bit longer to figure out the intricacies of grappling and that sort of thing. I mean, obviously, guys like Derek Lewis, it doesn't take a seasoned fan to just be like, wow, that is awesome. But somebody like Damian Maia, they might not get right away, but it's funny. Like even my own dad, it's funny. My dad just like recently, I think in the last year or so, he's like, I'm really starting to like this jujitsu stuff. He's like, I really like when they're doing the grappling. I'm like, oh, you're stepping your game up to the next level, man. I was like that, when you get past it. So, but no, the organizations are aware and they understand, I mean, it's a delicate balancing act because you realize you're never going to appeal to everybody. But you try to, and the other thing I think people have to understand too is, I hear some people talk to us, the growth of MMA is slowing. It's slowing. Like, no, it's not. Now, if you want to make that argument, if you want to make that argument in the United States, I can get that to a degree, right? But it's only because like it was on such a rocket ride up. Like you can't, you look at any business growth. Yeah, you can't do like 20%, 30%, 40% growth every year. You'd like to. It's just impossible. But internationally, you got to understand, man. There's so many markets internationally that are just starting to touch, into MMA, and it's just starting to reach them. I mean, so there's still a lot of growth to happen. I mean, look at what happened. I mean, man, look at the sport in Africa right now, man. I mean, it's still in its infancy in Africa.
Couple champions,
African representation. Yeah, can you imagine? Once we go over there and the UFC holds, some live events in Africa, and they're really seeing these athletes up close. Pretty crazy, man. Can you imagine if Israel Adesanya is able to claim the second belt, and if Francis Ngannou is able to win the heavyweight title as well? Now, those are big ifs. But if it happens, you'd have 4 belts worn by African-born, champions. That's pretty amazing stuff. So, there's things like that are happening with China. Look at the development in China, man. It's just, man, it was just kind of starting. And obviously, again, COVID has changed everything. But, for Zhang Weili to become a champion, I mean, that, and the UFC to be building a performance institute in Shanghai, and Genius. It's just things are going to the next level. So the growth of MMA is not slowing down.
Right. And I think the biggest piece behind that is the journalism. It's the podcast. It's that, right? Like, I feel like if I was Dana White, as much as I didn't like Ariel, I would be, doing everything I could to be pushing people towards him, because he is, I think used to be this is me being old school, but those 3-4 hour shows on Mondays, that's what hooked me in. That was my entry point. And I feel like I still miss those to this day. And I feel like that's maybe if somebody could rise to that point where they had that concept, that live, the excitement of the guys calling in, and it was always chaos, and that it was so special. And I feel like, just to bring that up, they're doing so many smart things. Like the day I heard they were putting those performance institutes around the world, it's like, oh my God, that is so smart, like so genius. Like the return on investment you're going to get on that is incalculable. Like, and to hear guys like Francis Ngannou that's talking about, creating MMA gyms in Cameroon and stuff like that pays itself back so much, not right away, but eventually. Like it's insane, right? And
you're building for the future. Like, so you're not going to get the immediate return on it, but what it does for the sport long term, yeah, it's massive.
And I'm glad you brought up Israel Adesanya, because I feel like he is a huge piece of my journey into hardcore fandom, because he was the first guy, maybe not the first, but the first that, I got to hear about on these shows before. This guy that's coming in from kickboxing, he's this absolute savage, right? Keep your eye on him. And I watched him that first fight, and and it was just like, who is this guy, right? And then you're following him, and then you watch his second fight, and you get to watch. I got to watch his entire career start to where it is now, like on the rocket ship. You don't get much higher than him, right? and to then get to follow, who he is as a person, his gym, his teammates, all that stuff. And just, it was such a special experience that I feel like that was what really solidified me following his journey. Like, I'm going to be a hardcore MMA fan forever, almost purely because of him. I think I was already pretty much on that track, but for everybody to be able to find that, they're going to find that one person if they are around the sport long enough. I just feel like that was, I feel like you could almost create a podcast, just bringing on MMA fans and asking, who was that for you? And who did you get to follow? Because it's one person that sucks you in. And maybe I can ask that to you, but maybe it's too far along. Do you remember, was there anybody that you got to watch and you really connected with, that sucked you in even further than you were along the ride?
For me, it was Hoist Gracie. I mean,
that
sounds, but it's like when you're watching, I mean, honestly, like I was watching from the very beginning and you see what Hoist is doing and you're just like, the hell is this? Like, I've never seen this before. Because at that point, most of the United States hadn't seen it. I mean, it was, there were karate gyms on every corner. You know what I mean? Now it's BJJ gyms everywhere. Taekwondo was everywhere. So to see him, just showing me this like brand new art, is pretty incredible. And then, then I started watching a lot of Pancras over in Japan as well. And that was incredible as well, because the grappling was on such a high level over there. And so it really was, that early, the early era, seeing the grappling legends that were changing the entire way we think of fighting. I mean, not that, you didn't enjoy watching Tank Abbott just absolutely destroy people, or, not that you didn't, I mean, of course there were people on the way, but for me in the beginning, it was Hoist. And then seeing, like I said, over in Pancras, the Minoru Suzukis and Masakatsu Funakis and, all these just superstars over there that were showing me something I'd never seen before. When I thought I knew what was fighting. And that really just kind of revolutionized everything.
Oh man, that's awesome. Do you ever struggle with, like favoritism? I mean, you've been around the game for so long, you probably know exactly how to deal with it. But for me, I just feel like when I try to put myself in the shoes of you journalists, I always think like, I'm such a homer for some of these guys. And then it always turns into, right, like when TJ and Cody fought the first time, that was tough for me because I loved them both so much. And it was like, oh, they're going to have to fight. And then they fought again. I'm going to have to go through this again of watching this happen. And I'm just kind of curious for yourself, have you just been around too long where it doesn't really come up anymore? You just love everybody equally, or do you still have to kind of check yourself with some of these guys that you maybe really, really connect with?
I don't think it comes up in terms of professionalism. You know what I mean? I'm going to treat everybody the same, whether I, quote unquote, like them or don't. But it is impossible not to develop relationships with the athletes that you cover. I mean, I think about a guy like Donald Cerrone, who I don't know, I've probably interviewed him like 40 times at this point in his career or something, maybe more. I don't know. And so how do you not develop a relationship with people that you see time and time again, you speak to time and time again? And man, I was talking about Neil Dariush the other day. I was saying, like, I feel like each fight week is like a chapter in their life. You know what I mean? It's like you're helping cover this chapter of their life, so like, how do you not develop those relationships? And it's gotten even to a different level now with I have a son, and again, COVID, we haven't been training since March, but before COVID, he was training in martial arts here in Las Vegas. Roxanne Modafferi was a jiu-jitsu coach. Justin James, who hadn't made it into the UFC, but is now in the UFC, was his wrestling coach. He went and trained at Robert Drysdale's, where Max Roshkoff, who of course, had the very difficult UFC debut. Those guys and gals, especially, I mean, that have like, and granted, they're getting paid for it or they're training time for it, but they're volunteering their time essentially to teach my kid. You know what I mean? Like, so of course I'm going to like have this affinity for them. You know what I mean? I've seen them out there helping teach my kid, not only technique, but also morals and integrity and values and all those things. So absolutely, I'm going to have an affinity for them. But when it comes time to write the article, to conduct the interview, to do whatever, I mean, you just have to pull yourself out and realize I've got a job to fulfill. I mean, Megan O'Leary has to interview Joseph Benavidez' opponents sometimes. You know what I mean? So it's like, you got to pull yourself out at that point and realize I got a job to do. And of course, you're going to have your feelings. That's natural. But those go aside when it comes time to do the job.
It's especially when you add to that, not only is it that intimate of relationship, but we're not talking about just everyday Joes. We're talking about the elite of the elite, the people that have, through sheer will, sometimes it's talent, but the majority of the time for people that are in the know, it's just sheer will and determination. These are special people. Like, and they have special personalities. When you mention people like Roxanne Modafferi and Donald Cerrone, who take away all their fighting accolades, they're just special people in general, right? Their personalities, who they are. It'd be hard not to be attached to them, even if you took the fighting away from it, right? And now you're trying to add all those layers you just spoke to, right? Like it's I would imagine that would be a tough thing to do. And I mean, I'm lucky that it's not my job, but I hope to grow this podcast to be able to interview some fighters. I mean, again, COVID is throwing some wrenches into it, but there's some local Canadian fighters that I'm trying to get on. I'm really excited to grow that and to start interviewing more of these guys. And I think I'm going to be really bad for that, because as soon as I have one person on, I'm sure I'm going to be just a homer for them for life. But I think that's what's nice about having a podcast is you can kind of balance that, where it doesn't matter. I can be a homer. I can tell people, like if Sugar Sean's fighting, I'm cheering for him, right? Izzy Adesanya, I'm going for him. Like, I love Jan Blachowicz. He's one of my favorite 205ers. I love his personality. I love his story. Like he seems like such a good dude, but I'm going Izzy all day. There's not a chance in hell that I'm not going with my boy. You know what I mean? And I feel like that's what's kind of fun, to stay on the outside of it and still be able to, touch little pieces of it. And, I think you sacrifice the intimacy and what you can get to, like with yourself. You have to keep that professionalism, but you get access to these people, right? What you give up for that is so worth it. I would imagine. It's just cool for me to, be able to touch it, whatever little point I can, because I'm just such a fan of the sport. It's really, really, really cool. I've already kept you here an hour. Maybe I'm trying to think of maybe one last question to ask you, but I've just now my mind's spinning of all the ones that I could ask. Maybe just to finish it off, what's exciting you? What do you see on the future? Maybe it's a young up and comer, or maybe it's a new. I didn't ask you about fighter pay. I didn't ask you about the rule set. I didn't ask you about so many things. But maybe we'll just finish with that. What's exciting you? What's on the horizon?
Man, what's on the horizon right now, honestly, is just getting fans back in the building, man. This has been such an interesting year. And it's been an honor to cover it, man. You know what I mean? Like, I was in Florida when we came back in the Jacksonville shows. I've been to all the Fight Island shows. I've seen everything that happens there. Obviously, I've been at the UFC Apex. I've seen what the UFC has done. And it's been an honor to cover it during such a weird time, because when the UFC was the first professional sporting league back, I mean that's legit sports news. You know what I mean? Outside of just our typical fight results and that sort of thing. So. And it's been unique, you know what I mean? Like, it's been cool to see how the UFC has dealt with COVID, and it's been interesting to see how the product has been presented without fans in the building. And some parts of it are interesting, right? Like being able to hear the coaches and corners more clearly, being able to hear the sounds of the blows landing. I mean, you can really tell the weight of the blows by the sound that they make, that sometimes you don't get to hear in a crowded arena. But man, I think back to like a fight like right before the pandemic started, and like Zhang Weili versus Joanna and Jacek, the buzz that was in T-Mobile Arena while that crazy war was going on. I miss that, man. I'm anxious to be back inside that. Like I miss those moments. We've had a year of it, and in the beginning it was so unique that it was the experience itself was fun to figure out how, but now I'm just ready to have the damn fans back in. It just adds so much when you got thousands of people cheering. So I'm anxious for that to happen. And that's kind of what I'm most excited about now. And I'm excited about continuing to do commentary. That's kind of a new. I did it for years, and I couldn't do it for several years because of some contract issues. But now I've started working, as I mentioned, calling fights with CM Punk for Cage Fury Fighting Championships, and man, I love doing that because it's kind of not a new wrinkle, but it's kind of resumed again. I really had some passion about doing it before. Like I did commentary for Tough Enough, which is an amateur organization here in Las Vegas. They're actually going to be on Fight Pass this year. But like I got to call, Ronda Rousey's amateur fights, you know what I mean? Before she even turned pro. So, stuff like that's cool. I love seeing the next generation. There's nothing cooler than, I was talking to somebody the other day, Alan Jouban, actually. I called a handful of Alan Jouban's amateur fights. I called, I believe, his first two professional fights for Tachi Palace as well. And, now I see him, at the desk on ESPN, you know what I mean? Like it's cool. It's cool to see that, to see, like you said, to watch somebody's journey and to see them develop. It's cool. I like doing that. So I enjoy doing commentary, kind of finding the next wave of star athletes as well.
Oh, that's so cool. And that's something that not a lot of people can do. I mean, journalism, if you could start right now, like I could start on that path, I wouldn't be able to call myself a journalist tomorrow. But essentially, you could be doing that work. We're calling fights. You need to have some real proof of your what you've done in the sport to be able to do something like that. And I feel like it's just so cool. And talking about the fans coming back, I couldn't agree more. Like I love all the balance as a hardcore fan, being able to hear the corners. I love that. Like watching these fights right now, it's a piece of history. And someone wanted to say, I feel like for you being in the sport for 16 years, if you were a football journalist from 1980 to 2006, right, a good career, you would see some historic moments. For being an MMA journalist for 16 years, for those 16 years, you were part of so much history. Every year was history. Yeah. Every year it was changing and it was new things. And you got to be a part of so much history that, it really felt like it this year, but almost for every year since you've been doing it, it has been history every year that you've been covering. And it really might feel like it now, but I think that's one of the coolest things about it is, it's always changing and it's a new thing to cover. It's almost like you're covering a new sport every 3 or 4 years, which is something I don't think we've ever seen before, because I don't think we've ever, every sport that is popular right now has been popular for a long time other than MMA. Right. And this is like a cool experience to watch people find a new sport and then to watch a sport evolve right in front of our eyes. It's so cool. And one thing I hope they do going forward, once we do have fans back, is maybe once a year, once every 2 years, to honor what this was and how cool of experience it is, just to do one card, even if it's just a fight night like that with an empty arena, that quiet, just because I feel like it's so cool and it honors kind of that memory of what it was. And maybe the UFC might not want to do it because that's throwing away a lot of money for the gates and stuff, but I think that'd be a cool ass idea.
I'm going to disagree with you because once this is over, I don't ever want to think about it again.
Yeah, fair. Very fair. Very fair. Okay. Well, maybe we'll wait 10 years and then we'll do it just for a throwback. Oh, that's awesome. Well, I can't explain to you how cool this was to be able to talk to somebody in the sport like yourself that has been in the sport for this long and has this much knowledge. This was such a cool experience for me. Even if I didn't get to record this would be, a really high point in the things that I get to do. So thank you so much for coming on and giving me your time. And I really enjoyed that. It was such a fun conversation. I think some people are going to become MMA fans maybe after this episode that maybe weren't as much before.
I hope so. Appreciate you having me.
Awesome. Thanks again, John.
You got it, man.
All right. Hope you guys enjoyed that episode. I'll try and keep this outro short and sweet. Yeah. What more can I say about that episode? It was very special for me. I think you guys will probably be able to hear that in my voice, just the excitement that you can hear coming through. I hope that comes across. Can't say thank you enough for John coming on. He's got, I didn't even talk about all the shit he's got going on in his intro. What a terrible podcast host. Oh man, he's got a podcast. He does the best interviews with MMA Junkie and John Morgan are both amazing follows on Twitter. Both amazing follows on Instagram. I learn a lot of my MMA news just from the MMA Junkie feed, but also John Morgan's personal feed. He's always got good stuff, showing good clips and stuff. So definitely go follow him there. The podcast with MMA Junkie is amazing. You get to see the insight of what makes this special. I think if you listen to some of the talk we have on what makes MMA special in terms of the media, these are the guys that are doing that groundwork, that are making it special for people like me to be able to bring these stories to those diehard fans like myself. And if this guy speaks to you, definitely check him out. I think he's one of my personal favorites. And if over these 51 episodes you've gotten a little bit of trust in me, you can maybe take that recommendation to heart and check him out. So that's what this podcast needs to be if it's going to be successful, is bringing people to places they've never been and showing people voices they've never heard. So if you guys could go check him out on all of that, follow his social medias, I'll have it linked in the description. That'd be awesome. Maybe drop a comment on his latest posts or whatever it is and just say, hey, I really loved you on the VonDubCast. That would go a long way for me. That just makes it easier to have him come on again, and maybe I'll get him for longer, an hour. Maybe I can get him an hour and a half, 2 hours, and really dig deep into some of the areas where we weren't able to get to on this episode, and maybe that brings more people in this space forward to want to hop on the podcast as well, and that would be awesome for me. So yeah, please check them out. Also, if you've been noticing the clips that we've been putting out on the social medias, please let us know what you think of those. Always looking for feedback, always looking for people to help make the clips. If you are somebody that's listening somewhat consistently, reach out to me. Love to discuss just keeping an ear out for types of clips that we could take out, right? You see the 1 to 2 minute ones that are on Instagram or in IG Live, or I don't know what the hell it's called, Reels, I don't know. But then we're also doing, 10 to 20 minute clips that are going to start going up on YouTube. As you'll see, I have seen, I guess if this comes out on Monday, Sunday night, or Sunday midday, Sunday at 1 p.m. Sunday, Mountain Time, on twitch.tv/custom sauce boss, we did a live episode. I mean, I hope it went great. I hope, it was a fun experiment, but this streaming thing is something I'm very excited to ask about and to do a live episode. I'm very nervous for it for tomorrow, but I think it's going to be great. So, hopefully you guys can give me a little bit of feedback on that, on how it went, if you were able to pop by, and hopefully in the replays you guys get to see, and that's going to open up some exciting possibilities for things in the future that I can do with my own stream once I figure it out and get it all set up, that is. So yeah, hope you guys have a great week. Got some really fun episodes coming for you in the bank, and then got some really good ones lined up to record, hopefully some more in-person ones as well. I know you guys really love those, so try and bring more of that to you, and yeah, we'll see what else comes on the horizon here. Thanks for coming on this ride with me, guys. Love you. Bye-bye.